Welcome to episode 9 of Alternate Realities, the podcast series where we literally talk about alternate realities, different perspectives on life. It is my aim in this series to bring you seemingly ordinary people who've actually lived rather extraordinary lives. And my guest today certainly falls into that category. He really is an inspirational man indeed. And I'm so privileged to be able to have a conversation with him today. My guest is Mick Dawson, a former Royal Marine who served in the Falklands War as just a teenager, went on to serve for 11 years in the Royal Marines before he left and became a sailor, and then aspired to do something rather huge with his life. His story is phenomenal, and I think the thing that's so special about it is it's a true inspiration of not giving up, of setting goals, of being determined, of not being afraid for failure, and of keeping going until you actually reach that goal. So I welcome Mick Dawson to the show today. So welcome to episode 9, and my guest today is Mick Dawson. Mick and I met, I think, a couple of years ago now when I saw him give an incredible talk. So we will start with that, I think, today. Mick, hi.
I'm very well, thanks. Thanks ever so much for the invitation.
Oh, it's nice to talk to you. You certainly got a really interesting life you've led, and the things that you're up to at the moment are wonderful with the Cockleshell Endeavour. But maybe we can come to that a bit later. So, where did you sort of start off life, Mick? Where were you born, and where did you go to school? And
well, I was born and brought up in Boston, in Lincolnshire, and my family had come from there for many generations, actually. But I made the decision to leave at 16, joined the Royal Marines, and disappeared in the Corps for about 11 years, before eventually going on to become a professional sailor. And then ultimately, via that route, I became a bit of an obsessive ocean rower, I guess.
Yeah, and that's something that you and I have got in common, because we've both got that commonality of the Falklands as well, don't we?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's effectively how we met, via that experience. So, yeah, for me, obviously, as a very young Royal Marine, I literally almost only just passed out of training and had the honour of taking part in it, but the misfortune to have my 18th birthday 2 days before the surrender. Wow.
So when the surrender happened, did you celebrate afterwards?
Strangely enough, one of the things I remember most about the whole experience is it's a surreal one. Is the guy with me on my birthday, which was irrelevant to me at the time, but it's an 18th birthday, pulled out a can of Harp Lager out of his gas mask and handed me my first legal beer in a trench. So that I look back on that, and that sort of highlights it, like the most amazing human generosity amongst probably one of the bleakest times.
I think that there was a lot of that, and it was only when I first started kind of researching to write the blog for the Falklands, that I really didn't realise how many people went down there that were actually under 18.
Yeah, quite a few of us. I mean, no regrets. It's the best thing that ever happened to me as a life experience. I wish, like all war that happens, I wish it could have been avoided. But if it had to happen, I'm as well as proud about proud of taking part. I'm grateful for the experience. I think it taught me a lot of lessons very early in life. So hopefully that's at least a small upside to what for many people has been a dreadful experience, obviously. Not least yourself.
Yeah. So you had your 18th birthday down there, and then you went on to do 11 years in the Royal Marines, yeah?
Yeah, well, 11 in total. So I did about another 9 years after the Falklands, 9.5 years. So, had a great time. If I'm honest, I think from that point on, after the Falklands, the whole thing was an anticlimax. It was a fairly monumental experience to have at the start of my career. And it was always, I think I was always searching for something else after that, or maybe searching for that again, I don't know. But yeah, 11 years was enough for me. And then I went out to become ultimately a professional sailor.
Why was it that you joined the Royal Marines in particular?
Well, I was always going to join the Navy. Ultimately,
okay.
The Marines are part of the Navy, as I know now the best part. But as long as I can remember, I wanted to join the Royal Navy. That's all I wanted to do. But unfortunately for me, my brother joined the Royal Marines during my last year at school, and all the paraphernalia at the time that came through the door, the letter box, little pinman exercises that you had to do and everything in those days. I looked at that, it looked a far more exciting prospect. And fortunately, I changed direction at the last minute, applied for the Marines, was fortunate enough to be accepted for training and even more fortunate enough to survive it. So, yeah, just one of those, like most things in life, an unexpected change of direction was exactly what I needed when I needed it.
Well, obviously to pass commando training, you've got to have an incredible level of fitness, and you're certainly going to need that to become a professional sailor. But, what sort of made you, was it the love of the ocean? What was it made you go into that direction?
Just that. I've even to this day, that's what drives me. I've got a passion for the ocean. I miss every day I'm not on it. In ocean rowing terms, which obviously in the last 20 years, that's what I've done primarily. I've spent, I think it's 524 days at sea on ocean rowing boats, either alone or with one other person. And I've had some pretty difficult experiences during that time on occasion, and I would not swap one day of it for one day ashore. It's been the best thing I ever did, is being involved with the sea.
I think, when I saw you give that talk when I first met you, the thing that blew me away was your capability to dig deep being alone out on the ocean. And I know there's nothing by comparison, when I did bodybuilding, but people used to find it quite strange that I trained on my own. And most people that had partners, and I didn't. I always trained on my own. And then if I needed to, I would let somebody spot me, for safety reasons, if I was doing heavy legs or something. But that was something that really stuck out when I saw you give that talk about and I'd like to talk about some of the things that went wrong when you were on the ocean, because some of it was pretty phenomenal. How you have got that ability to motivate yourself in some very difficult situations while you're on your own. And do you put that down to your own personality, or is that stuff that you think you've learned along the way, a mixture of stuff? What would you put it down to?
It's definitely a combination. I mean, I've got an eternal debt to having been a Royal Marine, and the things it brings out in you, the things it teaches you, coping mechanisms, basically. And I think the key thing is taking responsibility. If you put yourself in a situation, you choose to be there, you need to take responsibility. There's no point putting your hands up on an ocean rowing boat when the boat gets tipped up in the middle of the ocean, because you know that that's possible when you set out and you have to deal with it. So taking ownership of that problem, taking responsibility is a key part of coping with that situation. But right along with that is that passion of being at the ocean, being on the ocean, and everything I've ever been to sea on, from a warship to a private yacht to an ocean rowing boat, nothing compares to being on the deck of an ocean rowing boat, particularly if you're on your own, and the experiences that you can have at any given moment. It's a magical place.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot, actually, from both people in the Royal Navy and the Marines, that when they talk about them. In fact, actually, strangely, although my husband was in the parachute regiment, he actually was a great Jacques Cousteau fan. He adored the ocean, and, on the trip down south, that was one of the things he used to write home about all the things that he saw. So when I saw you give that talk and you were describing things, I could almost kind of imagine, that feeling of, except the difference was he was with a load of his mates and you were on your own in a boat. So let's have a chat about that. So what was your first row that you did solo?
Well, my first solo row came after my first row at all. And I probably should mention that first to give it context. But having gone out of the Marines and eventually become a private a sailor on private yachts, I became very disillusioned with a different environment. I've been with people in the Royal Marines who had literally put their life on the line for you without a second thought, to being with people who put a monetary value on anything that they do for anybody. And I didn't like that atmosphere. I missed the old camaraderie, so I was looking for something else to do, and I ended up finding a race across the Atlantic in 2001, built a boat, and with my brother Steve, obviously another former Royal Marine by that stage, we rowed from Tenerife to Barbados. And when we finished that row, which was fantastic, we discovered that nobody had ever rowed successfully across the North Pacific. And then that became basically a 10-year project for me to become the first person to do that. I didn't think it'd be 10 years. I thought I'd be able to crack it in the next couple. But there's a reason. As I found out, there was a reason why nobody had done it before. Of course, and I have to say, nobody's done it since we did it either.
Well, I think people's idea, and I know we had a joke before we started this conversation about my rubbish geography, but I think people have an idea of the Pacific Ocean as being, you know, sort of like this wonderfully calm sort of place because they're thinking of the South Pacific, aren't they?
Yeah.
So tell me more about, you know, so where does the North Pacific, so for the listener, where does the North Pacific start and finish, and why had it not been done before?
Well, in terms of the route that I was taking, I was rowing from Japan right the way across the top of the globe, basically, beneath the Aleutian Islands, into San Francisco. The ultimate goal was to row it into the Golden Gate Bridge. That is a distance, a great circle distance, i.e. the quickest route of, I think it's 4,564 miles. To give you an idea, when I eventually successfully completed that in 2009, we had rowed just shy of 7,000 miles. So that's almost, well, it is pretty much an Atlantic crossing extra that we had done, basically because we were being pushed backwards at times, north or south, and off the course. And it was a voyage that would take ultimately 6.5 months to complete.
So the actual distance should have been how much?
4,564 off the top of my head. Don't quote me on that, but it's it's in that ballpark. Shortest possible route. But the reality of rowing across the North Pacific, where there are literally no helpful conditions, there's no trade winds to help you. We ultimately rowed 7,000 miles.
That's a huge difference.
That's two. Well, I've got a team of Royal Marines rowing across the Atlantic as we speak from the Gran Canaria to Barbados, and they're looking at 2,500 miles to complete that row. And that's how much extra we did on that North Pacific row just to complete that distance.
Awesome. A, because you did it, and B, because that kind of speaks volumes as to how difficult that journey was.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. And I've lost track of, I should look at the log, but on numerous occasions we rowed past the same point, same position, 3 times before we left it behind permanently. We'd row for a week and get pushed back.
Who did you do that with?
Ultimately, in 2009, after rowing solo and almost cracking it on my own and then sinking, or capsizing and sinking, I returned to the North Pacific to complete it, and I went with a guy called Chris Martin, a friend of mine. I realised at that stage that 2 people could deal with that attritional nature of the North Pacific. One person can't constantly fight against the conditions, but 2 people, you can have somebody rowing whenever it's possible. And that's exactly how we eventually managed to achieve reach in San Francisco.
So tell me about that. So that was 2009 you managed it. So tell me, when was your first attempt when you actually...
2004 was when I was less successful than I'd planned. I literally got to the part, and I remember having the thought in my head where I thought, you know what, I'm going to crack this. And I was about 1,300 miles shy of the American coast. And I got capsized in flat calm conditions. There was absolutely no clue as to why I went over. But I was in the cabin at the time, actually get my camera ready to film how flat it was, and the fact that the torrential rain flattening the sea even more. It was like a moonscape. And while I was in there getting the camera ready, the boat was turned on its roof, effectively. Wave action, it wasn't an impact from a whale or anything. And unfortunately, I closed the hatch behind me, but not to the watertight setting, and enough water hemorrhaged through that slightly open hatch to stop the boat self-righting. I closed it off, but as we rolled round and got to the point where she had to pop back up, she stalled. And I was inside the cabin like an agitated hamster trying to get her to go the extra 10 degrees to sit back upright again, and everything would have been fine. And she dropped down on the starboard side, and that was it. Without even thinking about it, I knew that I was in a survival situation. The only way to get the boat out upright was for me to get out of the cabin. On open either the forward hatch or the aft hatch. Both were at least partially underwater. That meant as soon as I opened the hatch, the boat would flood or the cabin would flood, and the boat would turn turtle. So in a moment, there was, again, one of those huge debts I've got to want to be in a Royal Marine. There was no panic, maybe a bit of anger, but no fear really. It was just, I've got another situation to deal with here. I've got to survive. And I think that, I know that ultimately got me through that.
So that was the end of that, So what did that mean for you in that moment? Obviously, you've kicked into your training and you knew immediately what you needed to do to be able to, actually survive. Who was there to rescue you?
Well, there's nobody. I'd actually lost voice communications, on day 12 of that trip, and that was day 109 when I went over. And the only thing I had was an EPIRB, which is basically an emergency beacon and emergency radio indicating beacon that yachts carry. And I activated that from inside the cabin, which obviously I was trapped in for a while. But so I thought, hopefully that signal will be received and somebody will get to me. But my concern was, would that signal be getting out of the cabin? I was effectively locked in. So ultimately, I had to open the hatch, flood the cabin, and swim out. Which that might sound fairly controlled. It wasn't. It was one of the worst things I've ever had to do in my life, if I'm honest.
Well, it's survival, isn't it? I mean, you know that you've got your training, you know exactly what you've got to do to survive. But the thing that, and I remember hearing you when you were talking, saying about losing your communications, but it's only now that we're having this conversation that I realise when you're saying the difference between day 12 and day 109, that's almost 3 months that you had no communications.
Yeah, it was over 3 months, actually, I think, just over 3 months.
That's incredible. And we'll come back to how you got sort of back, because obviously I'm sure you didn't swim back, but we'll come back to that. But what was that like for you? I mean, obviously you are somebody who's very capable of spending huge amounts of time on your own. What was it like for you when you lost those communications on day 12 and then you just sort of carried on?
Well, it's quite strange, this, because this is going to probably sound odd, but I remember when the communications went, my first reaction was, right, now it's all down to me. I had no interference from outside, no assistance in terms of weather or anything like that, weather information. And I wanted it to be that. I wanted it to be something that I achieved or didn't based on my own ability. And as much as I realised, I wanted to talk to people, obviously, and the risk factor that go up by virtue of I couldn't. I do remember having that initial response of like, right, now we'll find out what I'm made of, and I maybe mentally had a way of turning it into a positive. And generally speaking, I have to say it was the most valuable 3 months of my life, because there's no hiding places in that situation, and I found out more about my strengths and weaknesses during that period of time than ever before or after, because there were literally no hiding places when you've got nobody else to speak to or bounce off or rely on, and so I see it as could have done without it, but it was a positive, and I look back on it now as a huge positive. You know, I look at us now, we're having a tough time now. You just look back on when you've had tougher times, and it makes it more manageable, doesn't it?
Well, that's life, isn't it? But I think what's incredible about when I heard, you know, you talk about this before, and that's why I was keen to have this conversation, is, yeah, I think for two reasons. One, because obviously what's been going on with the whole COVID thing, and a lot of people are being isolated in ways that they possibly never have been before. And two, as a former therapist, one of the things you come up against over and over and over again is, you know, people trying to avoid dealing with things, so they find all these distractions to not deal with them. So there is lots of ways of actually avoiding the self. And you've said something that I think is very interesting there, is that you found out all about your strengths and your weaknesses. You know, when it comes to sort of learning and experience in life, we need to look at both, don't we?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we've all got them. Nobody ticks all the boxes. There's nothing wrong with that. But where the problem comes is if you deny a weakness, or you overestimate a strength. You know, I mean, really, we're social animals. We need each other to achieve a potential, and recognising your own strengths and weaknesses. That's a fundamental building block of that, for me anyway.
Well, I think it is for everybody, but it's whether people actually face those things and look at them. And I think one of the things I picked up when you were talking about this, when you said about deciding to do this solo, and it was kind of on you whether you were successful or not, is that, you know, the coach in me will look at the way people set goals and, you know, how easy it is to be put off doing things and doing something different or trying something else because of fear of failure. And you didn't have that. You had the attitude that was very clear. That's my goal. And whether I do it is solely on me. But you sort of said whether I do it or not.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I was under no illusion, certainly after the capsize, how difficult getting across the North Pacific was. But equally, I'd seen it was possible. And I felt, even despite not making it in 2004, that I was the one capable of doing it.
Yeah.
But there's no way a challenge like that's a guarantee. But it's not a challenge if it's guaranteed. And that's half the appeal to fact, can you make it a reality?
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, when we crossed successfully in 2009, 189 days, 10 hours and 55 minutes, if you'd have asked me at 188 days, were we going to get into San Francisco, I would have said probably not. It was that difficult to do it. I mean, we'd have made the American coast or possibly the Mexican, but it was still stopping us literally a day and a half away from the American coast. So it was, I mean, this is 2009 we did it. Nobody's come close to repeating what we did. And quite frankly, I don't think anyone ever will.
It's just an incredible, it's just such an incredible achievement, Mick. And you know, the thing is with these kind of things is it's not like you've got a road trip, you know, where you can plan and have a map and all the things that go with that. And then you can say, right, well, we need to take a few spare parts and spare fuel and all those kind of things. The ocean is such an unknown quantity and anything can happen at any time. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a part, we filmed it. We had a documentary made eventually, actually, by Discovery. And there's a part that I filmed talking in the cabin when we were riding that storm. And I think I said something along the lines of everything that's happened to us individually, we could have predicted. We could have hoped none of it would have happened altogether. Something like that. And it was like that. I mean, you could say, well, okay, I could maybe predicted that would happen, but it literally everything. And to be quite frankly, a number of things happened that I couldn't have anticipated on that crossing, you know, because that's the nature of it. It's the scale of it. It's a huge stretch of water, isolated, incredibly volatile conditions, and things are going to happen that you can't cater for everything. You have to adapt when it happens.
So what made you want to do, was it the difficulty? Was it the fact that no one had ever done it before? What was it that made you want to do that particular trip?
It was very much, I saw it and still do see it as one of the last great firsts. And it's interesting what you said about your husband. I grew up the same generation as your husband.
Yeah.
And all our heroes were people who did stuff. And they were your Gables, your Ridgways, your Knox Johnsons, and Jacques Cousteau. I grew up like lapping that stuff up. It was phenomenal. It made the world look like such an exciting place. And all those people, they weren't celebrities, or they'd done something, and they were known for doing something. But now, I think that's been hijacked by celebrities. I wanted to follow that kind of role model, and I thought that this was something that I could achieve first, which is the key, before anybody else, and one of the few last things that's left to achieve for the first time. And that was the principal driving point, was to be able to do something and say, you know what, well, I was the first person to do that. No one can ever take that away from you.
They can't. If you're a first at anything, that remains that forever.
Yeah.
It's that simple. Even if somebody does it again, even if they do it faster, even if they do it whatever, when you're the first, you're the first. And it is always going to be that way, which is an incredible achievement. But I am interested, going backwards slightly, on day 12, when you tried it on your own, how did you actually lose your comms?
Well, typically North Pacific, I was battered by like 2 or 3 storms in the first 12 days, and the last storm, it's ferocious. What you do to stop being blown back or blown back as quickly, you put a parachute anchor into the water, which is about exactly that. It's a parachute, albeit a slightly smaller one than the one you jump out of a plane with. It inflates under the water on the end of about 80, 90 metres of line, and it keeps the back of the boat facing into the conditions. So it'll stop you going back too fast in the winds, but more importantly, it'll stop you capsizing, but it doesn't stop you getting beat up. And I was getting beat up quite badly in the cabin, very like a sealed cabin at the back, and my phone literally just got thrown out of a locker and smashed on in the cabin, and nothing I could do at the time. I secured it and put it away, but when things calmed down the following day, my phone, although it's still bleeping and tweeping and words, the text was coming up, there was no communications. From that day on, I didn't receive or send any messages or speak to anybody on that phone.
Wow, it's kind of almost like it was meant to be as well, because you then had that 3 months ahead of you where it was even more all down to you, because you're alone with that goal and your own thoughts, and that's it. There's nobody at all to rely on apart from digging deep within yourself.
Yeah, I'd say I'm not in any way trying to sort of sound gung-ho or anything, but I embraced it. I thought, right, now it's a proper challenge. Now the only way this can go wrong is if I allow it to. So I like, but again, it's that thing about I chose to be there. I took responsibility. I accepted things would happen that I'd have to deal with. And that, if you take that responsibility, it gives you resilience. You even by saying it, you can feel yourself bracing yourself for the challenges that are coming. If you don't take responsibility, you'll get knocked back at the first major setback.
And you see, that's the thing that I think is a great lesson in life for people. I think people don't realise, unless they've done something, with a huge goal in front of them, that taking responsibility for yourself, for your actions, for everything that you do is not anything to be scared of. It's a great thing to do, because that's when you do get your focus, isn't it? Absolutely.
Yeah. And not only that, it'll allow you to achieve more because you aim higher.
Yeah.
Simple as that. If you don't want to get it wrong, you'll just keep the bar nice and low. But if you accept something's difficult and you have to say that thing, I'm responsible for this, guarantee you'll be aiming a bit higher. You'll be running the risk of failing because you're aiming higher. And the value of what you're trying to achieve is the fact. It's in direct relationship to the likelihood of failure or setbacks. It's as simple as that. That's life.
Well, yeah, it's kind of the thing that I used to always say about bodybuilding, is that, I didn't always come first, but it was the coming second that taught me way more than the coming first.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But,
So,
what is coming first? It's all part of a much bigger story. Basically, and you're never at the destination. You're always moving on to the next thing. It's all, and you need the setbacks. I had setbacks. I sank. The biggest setback I could have ever had, and that setback really was what I needed to eventually be successful.
And it's an incredible thing. I mean, to be able to say, I'm the first person who's done that. And not just, it's not a simple little thing that you've done. It's incredible. That's an achievement, to do that sort of part of an ocean that has not been done and not been done. So you did this in 2009. So that's already 11 going on 12 years ago. And nobody else has done it since.
Several people have tried.
That's my point. That's my point, Mick. Yeah. They haven't managed it.
Almost all of them, well, several of them. A friend of mine actually has tried. Everyone who's contacted me, because no one would be happier than me or quicker to buy them a beer in San Francisco if they
yeah, sure.
But I've said to everyone that's asked me for advice, don't go. I said that's my bottom line advice. That people thrive on that, and you need to be a person who thrives on that don't go advice if you're going to take on that sort of challenge. So once you get past the don't go, then I'll give you the advice I think you need. But my reason was, why would you put yourself through that and the risks if you're not going to be the first person to do it? But there are all sorts of reasons why people want to do it. And the real thing for me is, firstly, I went with Chris Martin, and we as a team achieved that. It definitely wasn't just me. It took me and Chris Martin absolutely beyond our imagined abilities to make that successful. So, we were very fortunate in that. People might not be as lucky as we were, or have the same level of experience and ability that we had at that time.
Do you think part of the reason for your success was the actual team itself of you and him?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's the fundamental reason. When people ask me this, and Chris and I speak about this when we meet, and we say, well, what made us successful? Like our water maker. We had a fantastic boat. I built a boat specifically for that job, having lost my original boat, obviously. The boat was fantastic. We had, I had huge experience on the North Pacific, having done that and rode the Atlantic a couple of times by that stage as well. So all those things. But the single reason that we were successful was because we came together as the best team I've ever been involved with. We were just, we made up for each other's strengths and weaknesses. We complemented each other's strengths and weaknesses. And for 6.5 months at sea on a boat the size of a large dining room table, we never had one argument. That's not to say we didn't know there were times not to talk to each other, but we knew how to manage that situation and how things could be destroyed by, just venting at the wrong time.
Yeah.
And, I think as an example of teamwork, it's.
I think there's also a great lesson there for partnerships and marriages and all those kind of things as well. Is that there are times when things are going to be difficult, because we're not clones of each other as human beings. We're social animals. We like to be close to people, but, we have to understand each other's strengths and weaknesses. And if you don't work with them, you've got a problem. It doesn't matter what you're trying to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's the biggest stumbling block. I think we were on that boat, and whatever challenge came, by virtue of the fact that we worked so well together and got on so well together as a team, we could overcome whatever came. I mean, literally dozens and dozens of things happened that we, would have stopped us, but they didn't, because we had this ability to find a way between us to deal with it. I mean, I put it down to the thing that's taught to me in the Marines, and that fundamental building block of teamwork is you have people who put the other person first. And when that happens, immediately the team becomes stronger. If the team becomes stronger, the individual benefits. And you achieve goals beyond, the sum of the parts. You become, far more effective than the individual parts of that team. And that's the biggest compliment I could give to Chris is he had that in spades. I had to be taught that in the Marines. He had that in spades as a civilian. He just had that as part of his DNA.
That's incredible. And I think a lot of people can learn a lot from that, from exactly that. It sounds very simple, and it is very simple, but, in terms of saying it and what it actually represents, but there's not many people who are capable of doing it. It's that kind of thing that has to be worked at, doesn't it? And a lot of that is knowing exactly what you were saying, knowing yourself, knowing your strengths, knowing your weaknesses, and being able to, be there for each other in a situation.
But we were in an extreme situation, but it doesn't have to be an extreme situation to demonstrate that putting other people first and getting the benefits. It's simple things. When you make a cup of tea, make somebody else one first. When something's going wrong for somebody and you see it, don't ignore it. Just, say a nice word. It's simple things, but I guarantee the payback is enormous because it's contagious. People want to repay that 99 times out of 100.
Yeah, totally.
People notice that, and they'll want to repay it and a little bit more in it, and it just creates teamwork. It's as simple as that.
Well, going back to your first trip, when you lost comms, and we're talking about what happened with that. So presumably, as I said earlier, you didn't swim home. So how did you get picked up?
No, I didn't. I swam a bit.
I can imagine.
Ultimately, I had to get out of the cabin. I made the decision to get out because I was worried the boat was going to go over completely for the following night, and I didn't want to have to get out in the dark. And I wanted to get that EPIRB out so that light could get the signal in case it wasn't. Long story short is I opened the hatch and swam out. Not for the first time that night. So I was grateful for having helicopter dunking drills in the Marines that allowed me to cope with that situation because it was nightmarish. As soon as I opened that hatch, the water was freezing. It came in, cold water shock. It went dark. The boat heeled over completely. Didn't sink because obviously we had sealed compartments, but and then I had to let the cabin fill up completely before I could get out. And it wasn't a pleasant situation, but again, long forgotten training allowed me to control it, at least enough to get outside. And then I spent a very long 24 hours in a one-man life raft tied to the back of that boat, while the US Coast Guard initially from Kodiak, Alaska, flew out 600 miles south to my position. So we're getting that signal, and they redirected a ship to me, the hand in Philadelphia. And I think probably about 20 hours after I went over, they were on my location or at my location, albeit in the pitch black.
That's incredible, Mick.
It was a long day.
I can imagine. I can imagine it was quite a worrying day as well because, you're describing a situation of where you are in the middle of nowhere. And initially, you're not even sure if they're going to be able to pick a signal up.
No, I had no idea if anybody was coming. I'd got it into my head I was going to survive for 4 days. That was my mantra. If I can survive for 4 days, somebody will get to me. And that was what I was relying on. The strange thing was I coped really well up until the point where the ship came. I saw the ship and I thought, well, this is going fantastically. And it came towards me, albeit in the pitch black, but I could see it. I could smell the boat. I could see the guys running down the waist. It was a huge container ship. It was no more than 100 metres away from me, drifting, about 3 or 4 knots by me, and they missed me. They didn't see me. I had everything you meant to have. I had a torch, a whistle. I was in reflective clothing and all the stuff you meant to have, and even a flare from Japan that didn't go off. And they disappeared into the distance. And they had to come back a second time. And on the second time, I was literally 10, 15 yards from the side of this huge ship screaming at them, and they couldn't see me until...
Oh, wow.
About halfway done, and unfortunately then they shouted down to me, we got to go and turn around and come back again to pick you up, we're going too fast. I thought, that's progress, but as they drifted by me, this huge ship, I got to the stern, to the transom. There was an explosion of water. It picked up my upturned ocean rowing boat, dropped that on me and my one-man life raft, shredded the life raft, and as the ship was disappearing into the distance, the second time that night to turn around, I was now treading water for England in the middle of a pitch black Pacific.
So you had nothing at that stage?
Just
well, you had your legs moving, but you didn't actually have anything to hang on to.
No. Well, eventually, all I could do is climb onto the hull of the upturned rowing boat and hang on to the rudder.
Right.
Which is freezing cold.
So this is like real life castaway stuff, except it's in freezing cold water.
Yeah. Fortunately, I was in, I'd had my emergency kit in the cabin with me when it happened. So I was in a dry suit, albeit a fairly lightweight one. Without that, I'd have died, 5 or 6 hours after being in the water. I wouldn't have survived.
It would have been the cold, wouldn't it? It would have been.
Cold.
Yeah.
The worst thing that kept coming back to me, especially when I was in the life rafting and hanging onto the rudder, was that I'd had a shark down the side of the boat the previous night, rubbing itself on the hull of the boat, because they sometimes do that apparently to get parasites off the skin.
Oh, so you got a bit of company then?
Well, I was hoping I didn't have. I was hoping that in a day.
Oh my goodness, I can imagine what that must have been horrendous.
It was, yeah. I was having to put that one to the back of my mind, because I grew up in the 70s, so thanks to Mr. Spielberg and Benchley.
Jaws.
Yeah, I always think I'm going to get eaten by great white at Skegness. So in the middle of the Pacific.
Yeah. It's kind of not quite like Jacques Cousteau and watching the pretty little fish under the ocean, is it? Not that bit.
No, I'm sure Jacques Cousteau would have been much more controlled than I was in that situation. But yeah.
I don't think he'd have been on his own either. That is an incredible survival story. It really is. In so many, and more than anything, I think this is a testament to the depth and of not just your character, but your determination. Is that, you've obviously had a realization that maybe this is not going to happen on your own, and then you go and try it again with someone else. Yeah.
That I would have done it with my brother. My brother we would have both on it, but he had 2 young kids after the first Atlantic crossing in 2001. He couldn't put them through that 6 months of him being away in that kind of hostile conditions. And I didn't think anybody could replace him. But strangely, again, most things that happen when you least expect it. I ended up taking part in the 2005 Atlantic rowing race, the one that Ben Fogle and James Cracknell took part in. I was one of the organisers of the races working for him. And I rescued a boat that gave up on the first day and then stepped in and replaced one of the crew. And by virtue of that trip, a guy called Andrew Morris, who's a fantastic guy, a great friend now, who I didn't know at the start of the trip, I realised the final piece in the jigsaw to be successful and get a boat into the Golden Gate Bridge. It wasn't about reaching America, that's doable, but the Golden Gate Bridge, 2 people made it more likely, and I could cope with somebody other than my brother. I could work with somebody else, and that's where Chris Martin came in. I got to know Chris. He's a world-class rower, and he'd rowed the Atlantic, and I knew we'd get on.
How did you meet? Did you meet that year in 2005?
Well, he had the misfortune to be in that race across the Atlantic in 2005.
Right.
He rowed it solo, and again, strengths and weaknesses. I've worked out that I'm a fairly decent skipper, and I can run a boat and I can get from A to B reasonably reliably, not 100%. But one thing I'm terrible at is I'll ditch kit rather than fix it. And Chris, on his solo crossing across the Atlantic, broke pretty much everything on his boat, but he managed to fix it all. And I thought we'd be a great combination because
I love it. You see, we're back to that thing, aren't we? Strengths and weaknesses.
It is precisely that,
Yeah.
It's like that I'm exaggerating slightly there, but that's exactly how it worked. We always just, I was the skipper on the boat and he was the chief engineer.
Yeah.
That's how it worked. And we had these things that we were good at individually and as a team. But yeah, it was a I could not have wished for a better rowing partner. Chris Martin wasn't his, the best partner that I could wish for on that trip. And I certainly wouldn't be talking to you or anybody else about being successful if I hadn't gone with him.
I think it's an incredible achievement, and it's for both of you to have done it together. You've obviously just found the right combination and made it happen, and it's just an incredible achievement. So we kind of go backwards in this conversation and then forwards. You mentioned earlier on about the first row you did was Canary Islands to Barbados.
Yeah.
Which is more or less the route that you've got people on at the moment, raising money for charity, which we'll come to in a second. But when and how did the Cockleshell Endeavour come into being?
That, again, it's a common theme in this conversation. It came unexpectedly. I'd obviously completed the trip to the Golden Gate Bridge, and I honestly thought that I couldn't surpass that. I didn't think anything could top it, and I thought that would be the end of those sort of adventures. I wanted to do stuff, but I just couldn't think of anything that would motivate me enough to do that. And then between sailing jobs, actually, I got I was contacted by a mate's mum from the Marines. It was his 50th, and she wanted me to arrange for him to go back to the Falklands. As you know, as veterans, you can go back subsidised with the MOD.
Yeah.
Because she thought he was having issues. And I hadn't picked up on this. Long story short, she asked me to go with him. She said he'd enjoy it more if she went with somebody. And we went back to the Falklands for his 50th, I think 2015. And he was in 4-2 Commando. So we went all the places that were relevant to us. And at the end, I think pretty much the last day, he walked me up Anne Harriet through the battle that he fought in. He was only 18. And at the top, the crucifix or the cross at the top, that marks as a memorial for the guys who died there. He said, I've been having some issues. I went to the main charity for people with PTSD, and they said, you tick all the boxes except suicide. He wouldn't admit to that. Go away for 3 months, no drugs or alcohol, and we'll assess you formally. And he said to me, stood on the top of a Harriet, he went, if I could do that, Mick, I wouldn't need the rope, would I? And I mean, I just couldn't believe it. I knew straight away that him asking for help would have been the biggest step he'd have ever taken, and he was never going to ask him again. And I just said, I don't
think people realise when it comes to asking for help how hard it actually is, to say that out loud. And I'm so pleased, as much as I get upset, obviously, to see people suffering. You may or may not know, but I mean, I've got PTSD myself, and it's something that is nothing to be ashamed of. I always say this, it's a normal reaction to an abnormal situation, but I do think that there's something about the military, the people I've spoken to over the years, that it's almost this thing whereby they think that because they've been trained to be able to do a job, that they almost shouldn't have it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, it's hopefully, I think it's changing, but I think there's an attitude towards it. It's a weakness. It's an indication of weakness, and it's absolutely not. It is a normal reaction to an abnormal situation, and there are things that do predispose you to. There are some people that come through. I've met loads of people that have come through it. I don't want to use the word unscathed because it's not quite like that, is it? You've been in that situation, and it's not quite. That's not a very apt word to use, but that don't have PTSD, that it's different. But there are people that are predisposed to it. But when you go through trauma, and war is trauma, and there's nothing else you can call. I can't call the Falklands a conflict. I will not call it a conflict. It was a war. Yeah.
It's the most normal thing in the world for people to come out of that and have those problems. But, and I do understand as a therapist why they say no drugs, no alcohol, and then come back. But then where does that leave some people? Then there's a gap, isn't there?
Yeah, I understand the no drugs and alcohol, but I don't understand the get off on your own and sort it out. I couldn't understand the lack of support.
Yeah.
And that's where I thought, well,
there should be something in between.
Yeah, you should be. I had a horrible, I may be unfair, my thought was this is a filter system to get rid of people, but I might be being unfair there. I'm sure they could justify it, but I just didn't think it was correct,
No, I think what it is if I put my therapist head on, it is the same thing, that there are some drugs and alcohol programs for civilians that are exactly the same. If you're not clean, they will not see you. And then there is things like the 12-step program that anybody can go to, Narcotics Anonymous or AA or whatever, and they prefer you to be clean, but if you have a slip, people understand that that's part of it.
Yeah.
It's just different sort of ways of looking at it, but in actual fact, when you are using, and this is the problem with a lot of veterans, when you're using particularly alcohol just to cope because you can't bear being alone with your thoughts, then the idea of stopping that and having a gap between then and when you can get treatment is incredibly frightening.
Yeah, that was the fundamental problem he had, and they're saying you don't get any help with that until you get over this 3-month gap, and I just thought that was a flaw. And and my solution to that was, at the top of Mount Harriet, we'll find something to cover that 3 months up. And he said, well, what? And I thought, I don't know. But look round, I thought, I know, we'll kayak around the Falklands. No, how can that be? I should have done it. I should have come up with that idea on the Isle of Wight, really. But that's how it started. That's how the Cockleshell Endeavour started. We came up with that project, came back from the Falklands, called it the Cockleshell Endeavour. Obviously, the Cockleshell Heroes connection with the Royal Marines, and it's a kayaking expedition. And we spent ultimately 2 years. We thought we'd be back in the following year, but it's 2 years because neither of us could kayak. Steve became fit again. We got him fit, got him training. Took part in the Devises to Westminster in a klepper, a 2-man folding kayak, came second in that. And then we went out to the Yukon, paddled that individually, a 440-mile non-stop race up the Yukon to Dawson City. Steve, who's become a really good paddler, came 9th in the individual class in that. And then 2017, we went back to Falklands. We couldn't come up with the time and the training to do the whole 629-mile circumnavigation of all the islands. But what we did do is we got in a klepper and we had a 10-day expedition circumnavigating East Falklands, which is more relevant because obviously, as you know, that's where most of the fighting took place.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. I mean, for Steve and for me as well, the whole experience was nothing short of phenomenal. And I think most importantly, we got to meet and know and make friends with the Falkland Islanders and see things from their point of view as well. So
and that's very special, isn't it?
It's unique. I think we're very fortunate. The guys we've got around the Atlantic now, 2 of those are recovering veterans from Afghan, and they will never have the opportunity to go back to that country, sadly, in the same way that veterans of the Falklands can go back to
I hear this a lot, Mick. I hear this a lot, and I hear this with because I'm a member of the Army Widows, and I hear this when I'm talking. Obviously we've got widows that cross generations and cross different conflicts and wars, and I hear this a lot. That they feel not being able to go to places like Afghanistan and Iraq in the way that I could go to the Falklands. It's almost like something is missing. And it's very interesting because when Gary died, I had no intentions of ever going to the Falklands. They offered people to go on a pilgrimage in 1983 if you were not having whoever your next of kin was repatriated. And of course, that didn't apply to me because I had him back. He wanted to be cremated. And then I never thought it was something I'd ever want to do until suddenly I did one day. And having done it, what you're describing, when you meet those islanders and you actually get to see not just what the place means to them and what the war was actually about, but you get to see what they've done with the place since and the beauty of it. You know, it's just breathtaking, isn't it?
It is. It is. It had a huge effect on me, and I have to say, I know you could see what the effect it had on Steve, because as much as anything, I think it justified the whole experience to him. There was you could see the result, and like you say, that the fact that the Islanders have run with it in the sense that they've embraced. With the gratitude they have is immense, but they've embraced that opportunity to come back from that dreadful situation and made the most of it. I think in many ways the Falklands War is a unique experience, but in that way it's particularly unique that you can see the positive outcome of it from the island for the islands themselves.
Totally. And I think the thing that struck me, even though your experience was obviously, you did climb, you did go up to Mount Harriet and everything, which is on land, and you had all those experiences on the water too, and mine was all on land, but I know when I tabbed from Sussex Mountain to Goose Green, I was struck so much by how peaceful it was. It had been this demon in my mind of this deep, dark place where Gary got killed and the battle was, and, you kind of have that understanding of what would have been going on then. And then all those years later to tab across country, and because I was born and brought up in the early part of my life in Brecon, it was like being at home for me.
Yeah.
The ruggedness and the terrain was so familiar to me from my childhood. And then, walking across and tabbing that route, it's just so peaceful. Because, of course, that was then and this is now.
Yeah, I think, but then it is about that progression. Whatever the situation, you've got to try and move on from it and take positives from any situation. And I think it goes back to when we went back, we found positives, or Steve certainly found positives in an experience that had obviously he'd been struggling with for a while. I always prefer it when Steve's here talking about this himself, because I always feel I'm saying things that he should be saying, or he may not agree, but I think I'm right in saying that. He came back with positive feelings about an experience.
Do you think so? Having done that with him, because I know, again, one of the things that there's so much with experiential stuff that's important. And the one thing that I think that therapy lacks in terms of when you're talking to somebody is, talking therapies are great. And I always impress this on people. There is no therapy that doesn't work. Some just work better for some people. Yeah. But sometimes I don't think it's necessary that therapy, in inverted commas, is what somebody needs. Somebody needs to reframe what was into what is.
Yeah.
So do you think that's kind of really what you're saying that he got out of that?
Yeah. That kind of sums up the whole process that we went through, because what we went through ultimately was over 2 years of changing him, and it was simple things. All the things we did, almost all of them, we were in a boat together.
Yeah.
So we got talking. That was really key, and we were doing things that took us back to how it had been when we were bootnecks and what have you, challenging things, and it had to be challenging. He didn't want to go on a 5-mile paddle every Saturday. He wanted to do and train him for something difficult down the road, because that gave him focus and purpose. And all the other things sort of fell into place. I mean, what we did wasn't the ultimate solution, but it got him on that road to talking about stuff, not just with us, but with his wife.
Yeah. Incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Being fit, as glib as it sounds, being fit, that helps. It's such a fundamental building block. Get your physical fitness back. It brings routine, focus, all sorts of chemical balance issues, and it just gets you on that road. And once you're on the road, it's one step to the next thing, and you can start seeing the future as he didn't.
No, and it's interesting that there's adverts on at the moment. You know, so many people suffering from what's going on right now in terms of isolation and mental health and all the rest of it. And that's one of the adverts I've heard recently is that get out. It's a mental health advert. You know, it's get out every day, go for a walk, you know, do something.
Yeah.
And I think people do underestimate whether it's rowing or whatever it is, that the fitness element in daily life, people do really underestimate how much that affects you in so many ways, you know, because of what you're saying, focus, goals, but also the brain chemicals and the things that make, you know, the feel good of it as well. It's, you know, really, really good. And to put something like this together. So with that in mind, you've got this Cockleshell Endeavour that's been put together. And tell me about, because I know you had another book out, but since I saw you do that talk, you've actually had another book that's just come out last summer called Never Leave a Man Behind, which is a very interesting title. Can you tell me about that?
It is. Well, the first book, I think I had copies when we met. That was called Around the Pacific, the UK version, or Battle in the Ocean in a Rowboat in America, where it was released. That was about the story ultimately up to 2009 and me and Chris being successful.
Yeah.
Once I started on the Cockleshell Endeavour project with Steve, that went on for 2.5 years. By the end of it, when we were successful, we'd raised enough money to buy some folding kayaks for the Royal Marine Kayaking Association. So they're available for veterans, and they're not just Marines. If anybody wants to borrow a boat, take part in the Dividers to Westminster, we've got the kit and the equipment for them to use if they want to do that, or just go out for a weekend paddling. And I thought, well, this is a good result from what we've done. It's fantastic. Result for Steve. We got people taking part in the race every year, raising money for the Royal Marine charity. And once again, I thought, I'm all finished. I won't be doing. There's nothing else for me to do. What could top these things?
We can't have you finish. You've got to have a goal to work towards.
And then I walked into my local pub down here on the south coast in Rottingdean, the Coach House, and a guy walked in. Actually, I walked in, and the landlord was on the phone, and he said, "I've got one of your lot on the phone, mate." I said, "Who do you mean, ex-bootleg?" And he went, "Yeah, Steve Sparks." I said, "I know Steve Sparks." And he hung up. He said, "Well, he's coming in tonight. Pop in and see him." And I hadn't seen Steve Sparks in 38 years. He was my brother's best mate in training, and I saw him the day before they passed out. He was the best recruit in training. And he turned up at my local pub, and it was as if, so many veterans will know this, but it was as if it was yesterday, last time I saw him. And we got chatting, and within 2 hours, we decided that we were taking part in a race across the Pacific in a rowing boat from California to Hawaii. And
not far then.
Well, not compared to the Japan one. It's about
no, but it's still not, just down the Thames, is it?
No, it's about 2,500 miles, I think, ultimately. And we took part in that 6 months later. We went out to California, and we raced in 82 days, 16 hours and 54 minutes. Arrived in Hawaii, met Hurricane Lane, which was the second Category 5 hurricane ever to hit Hawaii. Arrived in Hawaii 3 days before we arrived, when we were 100 miles off the coast. So we survived that hurricane, still got in, and Steve Sparks stepped ashore for the Cockleshell Endeavour and became the first blind veteran ever to row the Pacific. Steve very sadly lost his sight doing selection for the SBS in 1984.
That's incredible. Such an achievement. So why is the book called Never Leave a Man Behind?
Well, the second book, Never Leave a Man Behind, that's right from the story I was telling you about going up Mount Harriet with Steve. Had a Cockleshell Endeavour project was created, and what it's gone on to achieve is ultimately it's those two stories. It's principally about Steve Brenham and kayaking around the Falklands ultimately, and Steve Sparks, hopefully both called Steve so I don't forget them, rowing across the Pacific. And for me, I look at us not so much respect. Well, actually, for both of them, they were let down by the system. Sparky's story is absolutely criminal. What happened to him? He was literally abandoned by the system. We've spoken about this. I don't consider the Marines abandoning, because it's not the Marines' job to look after recovering veterans. They've got another job to do. They would if they knew there was a problem, but in the 80s they didn't. But the system got hold of Steve Sparks. Basically, I make no bones about this, they kicked him out the door when he was on the verge of being completely blind, or he's got some peripheral vision but no macular, but registered blind, and he got no help, no compensation, and no rehabilitation for 10 years before Blind Veterans UK, formerly St Dunstan's, found out about him, flew him back to this country because he'd gone to live in Malta at that stage. And as Steve said, it saved my life. And Steve Sparks is not somebody who's defeated easily, I can promise you that. And for him to say to me that Blind Veterans saved his life at that point shows just how badly he had been deserted.
Anybody who knows anything about the services knows that the level of dedication and training you will have done to even go for SBS training.
Yeah.
To me, the way I've always looked at it is that I think, when you're giving a lot into the services should give a lot back to you. And that's not what happens in so many cases. And I think, it's not a case of a physical injury or a mental injury. Sometimes there's both together, and so that to my mind, they should just be looked after when things go wrong because of their service. How can you not? And this is not the first time. I hear this all the time, Mick.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'll take it further. I think as a society, we should look to not leave people behind, but most especially in the services, and you've got people like that. I mean, he won't thank me for saying this because he's a very modest man, but Sparky was in the Falklands, and he was in 4-2 as well, and he did the recce's at the bottom of the mountain for 3 nights prior to the attack. And on the third night, one of his fire support team stepped on a mine, and Sparky and I think the 2 guys with him literally carried him out of the minefield, with a bayonet on the bellies, and Sparky carrying this guy out of a minefield to save his life. And then fast forward 4 years, or 6 years ultimately, when he was kicked out, this seemed to be forgotten, and he was abandoned. Again, it's a system. The system gets hold of you when it gets to that stage. If we'd had Facebook and social media in those days, I absolutely know the family of the Royal Marines would have found a way to help him, because we would have known, but nobody knew that. So tell me about the Royal Marines charity then. Well, what happened to Sparky, that wouldn't have happened now, because the Royal Marines charity were formed at the start of this century, precisely to do that, to cover the fact that people were slipping through the net, Royal Marines are slipping through the net, and to support them serving and former and their families should they need it. So the Royal Marines charity do a fantastic job. Obviously, they've been connected with us right from day one with the Cockleshell Endeavour, everything we've done. The guys out there rowing across the Atlantic now are raising money for them, and that's been supported by the Royal Marines charity. 2 of the guys are recovering veterans from Afghan, Junior and Will, and over the years from their injuries, they've gained from the support of the Royal Marines charity. So things are better. So you've got 4 guys that are doing this row at the moment to Barbados, yeah, and so 2 of them you're saying are Afghan veterans, yeah. Yeah, 2 are recovering vets, 2 are serving Royal Marines from 4-2 Commando. Okay. Yeah, that's that's something. There's a bigger story to this row, actually, because when Sparky and I rode to Hawaii, we were greeted by the US Marines, the North Pacific Command, had a fantastic welcome, and it was suggested that a Royal Marine, US Marine Corps team should race against each other in the next race, which was due to be this summer. And so I said, right, well, I'll get a Royal Marine team together, and we created one. And the US Marine team didn't appear because there's only like 150,000 of them, and there's nearly 6,000 Royal Marines. We came up with a team, they didn't. And then the guys are still going to go and race to Hawaii, and then COVID came along. And they were due to go in July, and it was all cancelled, obviously.
Yeah.
They just said, right, we'll move it to the Atlantic, and they've created this independent row off their own
That's a
back.
really drastic, Mick. That is such a drastic way of getting out of losing. but yeah,
race again.
exactly. So your guys now are doing this, what you say, 2,500 miles from
Gran Canaria to Barbados.
Oh, incredible. And where are they going to land in Barbados? Because Barbados is actually, you wouldn't know this, but it's one of my favourite places in the world.
I love Barbados. Yeah, it's fantastic.
I nearly moved there in the 80s.
Really?
Yeah. I nearly moved there, and then decided after doing a course, had to do a recce and all the rest of it. And then it's such a small island. I think, what's it, about 14 by 21 miles, something like that. And I realised in the end it would have been a great life for us as a family, but I think I would have got island fever. But yeah, I love it. So where are they going to land? Where are they going to land? Where are they going to?
They're coming in the same place me and my brother rode in 20 years ago now. That's Port St Charles, which is the northwest, just around the top of the north tip on the northwest part of the island.
What is that, in St Philip?
Oh God, no, I wouldn't be able to say that without looking at a chart. It's literally a housing development, a luxury housing development stroke sort of marina, which it was being built when we rode there, but now it's completed.
Oh, that sounds more like St James then, yeah, on if it's northwest, yeah. Yeah,
it's right at the top.
Yeah, but oh my gosh, beautiful.
Yeah, they're looking forward to it. I spoke to them yesterday.
But it's very rough water. I mean, that top of Barbados, I don't think people realise it. Sort of when you go up on the east side in Bathsheba, where you've got the Atlantic, and it can be really, really. People don't realise how they kind of have this vision of it being very Caribbean, but the Atlantic side is really, really rough waters. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've been talking to the guys about the approach the last couple of days and things to look out for. But yeah, it's a fantastic place, but it's not without its challenges getting in. In a rowing boat, anyway.
I've literally got a photo of me at the most, I can't remember what it's called, but it's at the most northern tip. I think it's North Point or something, and we're actually sat having a drink there, and my hair literally is just at a right angle. It's just blown sideways, literally, because it's so windy up there. It's really some rough waters.
Oh yeah. We've it's a challenging place to come into, actually, but fingers crossed they'll get a gap in the weather that doesn't make it too challenging. And
where are they at the moment? How far out are they?
They're just inside about 800 miles now, without looking at the chart. I haven't seen the last 24 hours, but they've had a tough new year. They were on the parachute anchor because they got headed, and then the wind dropped, but still were heading them, and they were doing three times as much effort to do half the mileage. But the last time I looked, I think we're looking at nearly between 60, 70 mile days now, in which is really good. So hopefully we'll be seeing them getting in without pinning myself down to a date. I would think maybe 22nd, 23rd, they should be in successfully.
That's incredible. That's really incredible. I just, I love these kind of things because I think it's so important. And I think when people are kind of trying to move forward in life, when you're talking about two guys here who are, Afghan veterans, and, they've left the service. I think for a lot of the guys, if you look back to the Falklands that we've been talking about in this conversation, is that people can get lost in Civvy Street.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And, I love when I see it doesn't really matter. I know there's a lot of competition, obviously, between the services, and quite rightly so. But, at the end of the day, when you look at the camaraderie that exists, it doesn't matter how big the Navy is. When you're on that one ship, you're on that ship's crew.
Yeah.
When if you're in a troop, or if you're in a platoon or whatever, it is that camaraderie that it never goes away, does it?
It doesn't. No, I'm, what am I? God, 30 odd years since I went, and I was nothing but a gash and bootneck, and it's never left me. And nor should it. I think it's a positive thing. It's basic. I mean, I look at it now. I look and I see that the bond that grows in the services in general. I would say in units like the paratroopers and the Marines in particular, it's family. You become family with those people. It's that level of connection, and why should that go away? You know, it's a positive thing. That's what makes it so effective.
Can it? You know, when you're in that combat situation, you've got to have somebody else's back.
Yeah,
and it's kind of like what you were saying.
It goes
earlier,
back to that ethos of teamwork. Yeah, putting the other person first. You'll do anything for that other person, and that. You know,
absolutely. And it's something that I find that does not exist. I think society is changing and it needs to, but it doesn't exist in the same way in Civvy Street. And certainly when Gary died and my life changed, you know, it going into Civvy Street, it was like a completely different world.
Yeah. I spent several years shaking my head thinking these people aren't normal, and then I realised I wasn't normal. I'd been in an environment for 11 years that isn't normal compared to most society. Once you realise that, then it's fine. But up until that point, it becomes a bit of a challenge. But
except, don't you think it would be better if all of it was like that and it was normal?
I absolutely. You know, I'm not saying that it's right. I'm saying at least I could rationalise it then. Didn't think there's something wrong. You know, the whole world's wrong. It's the fact that I had the privilege of being in an environment that's not normal because it's not universal, but it's qualities that we should all aspire to. I still live by the same values I taught as a serviceman. And my family have the same values. It's not unique to the services. And, you know, you help people out, eventually it comes around and people help you. And it's not a bad rule to live your life.
It's not, you know, and something that people have said to me, you know, like often in my life, because I've always lived my life that way, you know, and I'm a great believer that whatever you put out comes back to you, you know, and I try as much as I can to be kind. I mean, you know, for example, where I live, all the couriers know that I'm here and I'm home. So they always say, can you take a parcel in for so-and-so or whatever, you know? Yeah. And you know, it is that community. And I have to say that although I live in London, one of the special things about the road that I live in is that we so many of us know each other to talk to. Yeah. You know, and the neighbours do know each other. And when I first moved here, you know, there were people that had lived here, like one of my neighbours, he's gone now, but he lived here 50 years. And he said to me sort of back then, you know, if it started to rain, then Mrs. Jones would bring in Mrs. Smith's washing because she knew she was out, and they just used to nip over they'd have gates in the back fences and things like that. And I think, you know, we've lost that sort of, because that sort of spirit that you're talking about, the service spirit, it was kind of there after the Second World War, wasn't it? And because it had to be. Yeah. It had to be. And I've seen the best and the worst of people through COVID, but I have seen quite a lot of that in the community around me. And it is quite heartwarming because we do need more of it. And you know what you said earlier, and I think it sums it up. If you're going to make a cup of tea, make somebody else one first. Yeah. Yeah, it's simple stuff. It's just, you know, it'll have an effect, I'll guarantee it. Because if somebody makes herself a drink and walks off and doesn't offer me one, that has an effect on me. I'll not forget that either. So it can have the reverse effect. Exactly. But if you do it for someone, then you guarantee that next time they'll do it for you. Exactly. It sounds stupid, but it's a simple thing, and it has those small things come together and create a positive atmosphere. Basic kindness. It's how we're meant to, we're social animals. We're meant to look after each other. And I think we may possibly have got a bit too far away Yeah, I know. I totally agree with that, and I think that if you look at what does happen, that there is in that generational thing, there has been a lot of selfishness, and there has been a lot of me, and that has had to change within what's been going on, because suddenly we're all in the same boat, aren't we?
Yeah. Yeah.
Suddenly we don't have the choices. It's not about what we want; it's about what we can.
Yeah. Yeah. It's probably the first real threat that society's had in my lifetime. Like, the whole society. We've had to deal with previous generations have dealt with the wars. This is the first real universal threat we've had, and it will sum us up one way or another, good or bad, how we deal with it.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And so, what's next? Before we end this conversation, what's next? Because I know you well enough by now to know there must be another goal that you've got for after this one.
Oh, there's a lot of things I'd like to do. I think I want to keep on doing stuff because the world's a brilliant place, and while I'm fit and healthy enough to do stuff, I'd like to continue doing interesting things. But primarily for me is I'd like to establish the Cockleshell Endeavour project as an ongoing resource for people, recovering veterans, not just Royal Marines. That's my natural connection, but service personnel in general, and to get projects mainly water-based, because I like to be on the water, or connected with it, and get them involved in things, not necessarily as extreme as some of the things we've been talking about. That's not required for everybody, but getting guys kayaking, some of the incredible rivers and that we've got in the UK, get them a weekend under a tent in a double boat, especially if you can link that with guys who are serving now, link the generations, because they all speak the same language, whatever generation they are, and create a series of events, expeditions, races that are useful for recovering veterans going forward. I think personally, my experience from all this is that transition is the biggest problem, or the greatest problem.
Yeah.
Guys, as much as injury, be it mental health or physical, because the transition from Civvy Street or to Civvy Street from the services seems to be greater now than it's ever been. And more
why do you think that is, Mick?
I think, well, going back to my experience when I came out, and I'm just shaking my head because it's a totally different set of values. And that's a horrible generalisation because that doesn't cover everybody, but it's much more dog-eat-dog than as competitive as it can be in the services. Ultimately, there's a support network there, and it's about the group doing well. And I don't think it's always the case in Civvy Street. Again, I know that's a terrible generalisation, but I think that's a big step for people. Oddly enough, Will, one of the guys out rowing the Atlantic now, he was shot by a sniper in Afghan. Ultimately had to be medically discharged, and talking with him and getting to know him on the build up to this and some of the things he said since, it's that transition into Civvy Street that he's found the hardest, more than the injury, because he was 19. He'd only been in the Corps less than 2 years, and then he was out. And he's lost all that he'd joined up for. All he wanted to be as a Royal Marine, and that was taken away. So that transition is more of an impact for him, I think, in many ways than the injury. And I think, generally speaking, most people would relate to that, would realise, it is. A lot of people deal with it, no problem at all. But it's something that would be good to create something, put them in place to make that transition less of an issue.
And I think it is very much. There's I don't know if you're aware of it, but I sent you a link that from one of my other podcasts. There is a study going on at the moment called the Knock on the Door study, and it's been a long time coming. With people like myself who obviously end up in Civvy Street for different reasons. So any kind of transition when you're used to military life and you have to go back into Civvy Street is a transition, and it's not an easy one. But I'm wondering if there is something that's a bit harder? I know because there's one person that comes into my mind who was injured pretty badly, that was in Gary's battalion, and so his career was over before it began. And so when you're talking about Will being only 19, it's that thing. And I do wonder whether it's harder when you haven't chosen to leave at the end of 3 years, 9 years, whatever, and when you have to leave because of an injury, and that injury happened because of your job, whether that is a harder transition.
Exactly that. That's exactly. Will's had it taken away from him. There was no choice in that. It's gone. It was gone. Sparky, with his loss of sight, he had the same thing. He would have gone to the top of the tree. He was an exceptional Royal Marine, and he had that taken away. And so that transition, which is difficult for anybody, not that you can't cope with it, but it's a transition that you need to do.
But your choice is gone.
It's not your responsibility. It's been forced upon you, and that's a tougher process. So, that's why I think having a connection, that's what the guys have said while they're out rowing. It's good that they're back with their mates, people who speak the same language, same sense of humour, the same attitude to the problem, same challenge. It's a positive thing, and it helps them through that process while they, which they will find that new direction and get the focus again.
So what would you need then from where you're at the moment, going forward and thinking about how you can make this a more universal thing for all services? What would you need to make that happen?
I think I'd have to sit down with people who are better at structuring the organisation to set that up. That's not as grand as that one. That's not meant to sound grand, but I'm great at grabbing hold of a project and making it happen. By hook or by crook, we'll get there, but that's not sustainable if you're dealing with a number of different projects that you're not actually competing yourself. So I would need, to basically get a team together that cope with the different aspects of organising those things on a grander scale. And approaching it in a professional way, taking it to a registered charity level, or working with a charity as a sub department, so to speak. But it would have to be on a less by the seat of your pants. We'll do the show right here attitude that I probably have had for the last 5 years, just because it has to be sustainable.
Yeah, of course. Well, I wish you all the best with that, and I'm sure, given what you've made happen in the past, you will make that happen too. But as we wind this conversation up, where can people, get a copy of Never Leave a Man Behind?
Oh, well, if the new book is available on Amazon, if you go to amazon.co.uk and put Never Leave a Man Behind, or my name, actually, that's on there, and the first book, Row in the Pacific, is still available. If anybody was be crazy enough to request a signed copy, I'm more than happy to do that via my website, which is www.189days.com. That's DAYS.com. But probably more importantly at the minute, there's my much more hard-working colleagues out on the Atlantic deserve a shout-out. If you'd like to follow them or to track their progress, or if you're able, donate to the Royal Marine charity and support the guys, is via www.cockleshellendeavour.com.
Brilliant, Mick. And so they're planning on getting there later this month. So the link to donate to the Royal Marine charity, is that going to be ongoing?
The link to the Royal Marine charity, well, at any stage you can donate to the Royal Marine charity directly. But the link to the Royal Marine charity on our website will stay up probably for another 3 or 4 weeks.
Brilliant. Well, it's been so interesting talking to you today, and thank you so much for coming on Alternate Realities. It is a show about seemingly ordinary people who lead extraordinary lives, and you certainly have done that and are continuing to do that. So thanks for coming on and having a conversation with me today.
No, thank you for the invite. It's been brilliant. Thank you. Great to speak to you.
concludes episode 9 of Alternate Realities. A huge thank you to Mick for sharing his truly inspirational story with us today. Perhaps during this last year, most of us have sat back and thought about life and choices a little bit more. I know I certainly have. Things don't always go the way that we want in life. And with COVID, it's been unprecedented times. Things like hopping on an aeroplane and going on holiday, going to the gym, booking a hairdressing appointment, or visiting family for those all-important special times, and particularly those very much needed hugs, have been things that we can no longer take for granted. And although the world is about to open up again, it would be a shame for us to lose the lessons that this last year has brought to us. When you listen to the stories that Mick has told today about the veterans that lost their choices, whose career was taken away from them, it's easy to see when you relate that to COVID and what's been happening as to how choices are so important in life. But it's also really important to see that when things do happen to us, such as injury or illness, we don't have to give up completely. We can set ourselves goals within new parameters, within perhaps new limitations, and sometimes achieve things that we probably never dreamed that were possible, were we to have those situations such as losing our sight or having an injury that stops us doing what we used to do. Perhaps it's time for us all to start thinking about setting goals for the future and thinking more about living and working as a community together. Since we recorded this, Mick's team did arrive in Barbados, and although they achieved what they actually set out to do, his Cockleshell Endeavour will go on to help many more people in the future. So please have a look at the link on YouTube and find it in your heart to donate to this very special man who's helping so many people in their onward journey.